I need a wife, Idris Fletcher said flatly, leaning across the marble-topped table toward Odette Wells like he was discussing the weather. Odette blinked. I'm sorry what? Idris didn't flinch. His custom-tailored navy suit did all the talking for him. Sharp, expensive, like him. A fake one. Temporary, 3 months. In exchange, I'll pay off your student loans. She dropped her fork. It clattered against the porcelain plate. You tracked me down for a fake marriage proposal. You said you needed a job, he replied smoothly. This is a job, one you're uniquely suited for. You're smart, discreet, and you don't scare easily. Idris, this is insane, she hissed, glancing around the restaurant. You haven't seen me since college. You can't just show up and offer me this. I can if I need to close a deal worth $80 million, he said calmly, sipping his scotch like this was any other Tuesday. Odette couldn't believe this was happening. 1 minute, she was working a double shift at a downtown coffee shop. The next, she was sitting in a 5-star restaurant with Idris Fletcher, ex-college acquaintance, turned millionaire hotel mogul, listening to him pitch a fake marriage like it was a spreadsheet. How does marrying me help your deal? She asked, still trying to make sense of it all. He leaned back, his expression unreadable. The board of the family-run resort chain I'm acquiring only does business with stable, family-oriented men, which I am not publicly. They're traditional. Old school. They want to see a ring on my fiancé's finger at the next gala, and if they don't, the deal dies, so I need someone who can play the part. She stared at him for a long second. And I was the first woman that came to mind. Yes, he said, without hesitation. Her heart did a weird thing in her chest. She hated that. Why me? Because I can trust you, he said simply, and because you've got nothing to lose. That stung more than she expected, but he wasn't wrong. She was barely making rent, drowning in student debt, and had just been passed over for another promotion at the bookstore she'd been filling in at, still. This is crazy, she muttered. He pulled something from his inner jacket pocket and slid it across the table. A check, her name on it. The number was staggering. 3 months, he said. You wear the ring, smile at the events, maybe kiss me once or twice to sell it, then we get a quiet annulment, clean, simple. Her eyes were glued to the zeros. That money could change her life, but this wasn't just some gig. This was pretending to be married to Idris Fletcher. The same Idris who once made girls cry with a single look. The same Idris who never let anyone get close even back in college when he was just the quiet guy with a sharp jawline and an even sharper mind. What's the catch? She asked finally. He shrugged. No dating other people during the contract, no talking to the press, and you'll need to move into my penthouse for optics. Live with you, he met her gaze. It has to be convincing, she swallowed. Her throat felt dry. And what do you get out of this? He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. $80 million. She looked down at the check again, then back at him. I'll think about it. You've got until noon tomorrow, he said, standing. If you say yes, I'll send a car. If not, I'll find someone else. She watched him walk away, the weight of the check burning in her hand. 24 hours later, she was standing in front of a Rolls-Royce, wearing a dress she didn't own, with a diamond on her finger that looked like it cost more than her entire life. You actually said yes, Idris said as he opened the door for her. I'm still deciding if I've lost my mind, she muttered, sliding into the leather seat. He followed, adjusting his cufflinks. Let's just get through this first event. Smile, nod, act like you're in love with me. Do I get a script? No, he glanced over at her. Just don't look like you want to kill me. Odette rolled her eyes, but her heart was racing. The car pulled up to a glittering hotel entrance, the red carpet already lined with photographers. Ready to meet your new fake in-laws? He asked as he extended his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His palm was warm, steady, too steady. Let's go play house, she said. 3 hours later, she was still wearing heels, a fake smile, and Idris's hand around her waist. His parents were terrifyingly polished. The board members were colder than the champagne. But Idris was flawless. He played the doting fiancé with unnerving ease, laughing at her jokes, brushing her hair behind her ear, whispering things that made her blush loud enough for others to hear. You're good at this, she murmured between fake toasts. He leaned down. So are you, they already love you. She tilted her head. How do you know? Because they're watching you like a hawk, he said, eyes locked on hers, and they're smiling. He didn't smile back. But there was something in his gaze, something dangerous and unreadable that made her stomach twist. I think we fooled them, she said. He didn't answer, just raised his glass and clinked it against hers. To the beginning of a very profitable partnership, he said. She drank. But in the back of her mind, something itched, because this didn't feel like a game anymore, not with the way he looked at her, not with the way her heart reacted every time he touched her. And definitely not with the way she was starting to wonder what it would feel like if this whole thing wasn't fake at all. The penthouse was nothing like she expected. Odette stepped inside and forgot how to breathe. Floor-to-ceiling windows spilled golden light across polished stone floors. The skyline of the city stretched out in every direction, glittering like it had been made for him. It smelled faintly of leather and cedar, and everything from the sleek black piano in the corner to the curved staircase leading to a second floor screamed wealth without apology. Idris walked past her, tossing his keys onto a tray beside a sculpture she was too afraid to touch. "You'll take the guest bedroom at the end of the hall," he said, already loosening the buttons on his shirt collar. "We'll need to coordinate our schedules. There's an event every weekend between now and the closing date." She turned slowly, her heels clicking against the stone. "You don't waste time settling in, do you?" "There's no time to waste," he replied, disappearing into a side room without another glance. She wandered deeper into the space, running her fingers lightly along the back of a velvet armchair. Every item looked like it had been selected by someone who thought in precision and permanence. No clutter, no softness. She found her room exactly where he'd said. It was larger than her entire apartment. Neutral colors, crisp sheets, a wall-length mirror, and a closet already filled with clothes in her size, tags still on. She didn't want to ask how he knew her measurements. The next morning, she found him in the kitchen, barefoot and reading over documents with a cup of coffee in one hand. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, and the top few buttons were undone. There was a quiet tension in the room, like he'd been up for hours, chasing thoughts he couldn't quite catch. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she asked, reaching for a glass of water. "I sleep enough," he replied without looking up. She leaned against the counter, studying him. "You know, I don't remember you being this intense in college. That's because you didn't really know me in college. I knew you well enough to recognize when you're trying to bury something." He looked up at her then. His face was unreadable, but his eyes had the weight of someone who'd built walls too high to climb. "I'm not burying anything," he said flatly. She didn't push. Not yet. Later that afternoon, a stylist arrived. Odette barely had time to argue before she was being measured, draped in fabric, and fitted for a dress she hadn't requested. Idris walked in partway through, glanced at the design, and nodded once. "She'll wear that to the gala next Friday," he said. The stylist beamed. "Excellent choice." Odette waited until they were alone again. "You didn't ask if I liked the dress." "You'll look perfect in it," he said, already focused on his phone. "That's not the point." He glanced up. "You're not here to wear what you want. You're here to wear what sells the story." She took a step forward. "And what story am I selling exactly? That you're in love with a woman you barely know, that you're building a future with someone you met for coffee 2 days ago." He put the phone down. "You're selling the idea that I'm no longer the kind of man who sees people as disposable." The words dropped like stones between them. She studied him carefully. "So this isn't just about pleasing some conservative board. This is about changing the way people see you." He didn't deny it. "I've spent the last 10 years creating an empire. That doesn't make people want to trust you. It just makes them want to watch you fall. And I'm supposed to soften the edges," she said quietly. "You already do," he replied, and for once, there was no calculation in his voice. The next event was a black tie fundraiser hosted at a private estate just outside the city. The drive there was quiet but not uncomfortable. Odette sat back in the leather seat, watching the trees blur past, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her clutch. "You used to draw," he said suddenly. She turned to him, surprised. "You remember that?" "I remember you sketching in the back of economics class instead of taking notes." "I still have the notebook," she said, smiling faintly. Most of the pages are covered in unfinished faces. Why unfinished? Because I never wanted to draw the same expression twice. He looked at her then, really looked. You always saw more than people gave you credit for. She didn't know what to say to that. The estate was all white columns and manicured hedges. A string quartet played on the lawn and waiters circled with champagne. As they stepped inside, Idris looped his arm through hers, his grip steady. You remember the names I gave you to memorize? He asked in a low voice. I remember everything, she whispered back. He smiled, not the cold, practiced one he used in public, but something smaller. Real, they moved through the crowd like a unit, polished and seamless. Odette laughed when she needed to, nodded at the right times, and let her hand rest naturally on his chest when they stopped to speak with a major donor. But it wasn't until later, when they stepped out onto the balcony to escape the noise, that she felt the shift. The night air was cool and the city lights spread out beneath them like fireflies. You do this often? She asked, sipping her drink. Only when the stakes are high, and are they high now? He turned to her. Higher than they've ever been, she held his gaze. Then maybe you should stop pretending you don't care about the outcome. He moved closer, his voice quiet. What makes you think I'm pretending? Something in her chest tightened. She stepped back instinctively, needing air, needing space. But he reached for her hand gently, like he wasn't entirely sure she'd let him. I don't know what this is anymore, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't let go. Neither do I. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the city humming beneath them, something fragile and electric hanging between them, and then the door behind them opened and the moment shattered. Idris, a voice called out. They're asking for you inside. He didn't move right away, his eyes were still on her. I'll be right there, he said, then turned back to her. You should stay close tonight. Why? She asked, her voice steady. Because someone's going to ask questions. And I don't want you answering them alone. She nodded slowly. He disappeared into the crowd and she was left on the balcony, her heart racing for reasons she didn't understand. This was supposed to be a job. But the line between performance and something else was beginning to blur, and she wasn't sure she wanted to stop it. By the time they returned to the penthouse, the silence between them had shifted. It wasn't cold or distant, it was taut, like a thread stretched too tight. Odette slipped off the heels she'd worn all night, her toes grateful for the release, but her mind still tangled with everything Idris had said on the balcony. Or rather, everything he hadn't said. She padded into the kitchen, not expecting him to follow. But he did. You handled the donor's wife better than I expected, he said, opening the fridge and pulling out a bottle of water. She usually eats people alive. I figured if I kept her talking about her dog's dietary restrictions long enough, she'd forget to ask how we met, Odette replied, pulling her hair up into a loose knot. Worked, didn't it? He handed her the water without comment. She took it, but didn't drink. You don't like these events, she said. No one likes them. You walk through them like you're made of armor. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. That's the point, Odette hesitated. Why do you need all of this? He met her gaze. You mean the company? No, she said, voice softer. This empire, the deals, the penthouse, the persona. His jaw flexed slightly. Because it's mine, every inch of it. No one handed it to me. She studied him carefully. But what does it cost you? He didn't answer. Instead, he pushed off the counter and walked past her. She watched his retreating back, frustration flickering under her skin. Not at him. At herself for wanting more than she was supposed to. The next morning, Idris was already gone. His assistant had delivered a folder to her room with a detailed itinerary for the week. Dinners, luncheons, a charity art auction on Thursday, a black tie gala on Saturday that required a second fitting. Odette stared at the schedule, then at the designer garment bag hanging on the back of her door. She picked up her phone, hesitated, then pressed the number tucked into the bottom of the folder. I'd like to add a change to the gown, she said. Something that doesn't feel like camouflage. The tailor didn't argue. That evening, Idris returned just as she was finishing the last strokes of a charcoal sketch. She quickly closed the pad before he could see it. You've got paint on your cheek, he said, setting a small box on the table. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand. It's charcoal, not paint. He stepped closer, reached out, and gently brushed the spot away with his thumb. She froze. There, he said, then stepped back like nothing had happened. Her pulse hadn't gotten the memo. What's in the box? She asked, trying to sound casual. He nodded at it. Open it. Inside was a pair of earrings. Sapphire set in platinum, elegant, precise, not flashy, just devastatingly perfect. There for the gala, he said. I can't accept these. You already have. She looked up at him. Why? Because they'll match the dress, and because I wanted to. She closed the box slowly. If this is still about optics, there are cheaper ways to impress people. It's not about them, he said quietly. She didn't know what to do with that. Thursday's auction was held at a restored cathedral in the heart of the city. The stained glass windows caught the late sun, casting fractured colors across the marble floor as guests sipped champagne and murmured over sculptures Odette couldn't begin to price. Stick close, Idris said, steering her gently toward the center of the room. The investor we're meeting is old money, his wife is worse. I'll take that as a challenge, he gave a low laugh. You really don't flinch, do you? Not when I'm wearing sapphire earrings. The investor's wife turned out to be less terrifying than expected, more interested in gossip than judgment. But as the conversation dragged on, Odette noticed Idris growing tense. She waited until they were alone again, tucked near a centuries-old column. What is it? He shook his head. Nothing, liar. He glanced down at her. His team's been stalling on paperwork. If we lose them, it puts the whole deal at risk. Then let's give them something to talk about. Before he could ask what she meant, she stood on her toes and kissed him. It wasn't a showy kiss. It wasn't rushed or overly staged. It was slow, deliberate. Her hand slid to his jaw, and his fingers found the small of her back, pulling her closer instinctively. When they broke apart, the room had gone quieter. You didn't have to, he began. I know, she said, but I wanted to. He looked at her like he didn't understand what that meant. Or maybe he just didn't want to. Back at the penthouse, neither of them mentioned it. They both retreated to their separate rooms, but sleep didn't come easily. Odette stared at the ceiling, trying to remember when it had stopped being pretend. It wasn't just the gifts or the way he looked at her in public. It was the way he listened when she spoke, the way he noticed when she was too quiet, the way he touched her only when it mattered. The next day, while Idris was in a meeting, she wandered into his office. Not to snoop, just to understand. It was minimalist, clean lines, crisp wood. One large oil painting of an empty dock at sunrise, but what caught her attention was the old photograph on his desk, two boys. One older, one maybe 10, standing in front of a beat-up motel. The older one had his arms slung protectively around the younger. Both were smiling, but there was something fierce behind the younger boy's eyes, something too grown for his age. She heard the door click behind her and turned. He was watching her. You were brave to keep that photo, she said. He walked toward her. It reminds me where I started. And where was that? A place no one expected me to leave. She turned to face him. And the boy beside you, my brother, he died when I was 17. Her breath caught. I'm sorry, he nodded once. He was the reason I got out. He told me to run before the place ate me alive. Odette stepped closer. And did it? No, he said quietly. But it tried. She reached for his hand, and this time he didn't pull away, neither did she, and in that moment they weren't pretending, not even a little. The night of the gala arrived under a sky streaked with violet and copper. The chauffeur opened the door, and Odette stepped out in a silver gown that shifted like liquid under the lights. The earrings Idris had given her caught the flash of the cameras, but it was the way he looked at her, quiet, focused, almost reverent, that made her skin warm despite the chill in the air. Inside, the venue was cathedral-like in scale and opulence. Crystal chandeliers floated above a sea of tuxedos and gowns, and the scent of orchids clung to the air. A string ensemble played something sweeping and slow, but Odette barely registered the music. You're tense, she said as Idris guided her toward the staircase. I'm expecting a final offer tonight from the lead investor, he said. If it goes sideways, the entire acquisition collapses. She paused halfway up the steps. Then maybe you should tell them the truth. He looked at her, not with confusion, but with resignation. That I used a fake engagement to manipulate their trust. No, she said, stepping closer. That you've changed. That you're not the man who needed to fake anything anymore. He didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't believe it yet. At the top of the stairs, they were greeted by a man in his 60s, his wife just behind him. Idris introduced them as the Montgomerys. The man's handshake was firm, but his eyes scanned Odette with a kind of appraisal she was used to from expensive clients at the bookstore, people who assumed they understood your worth in 5 seconds or less. Pleasure to finally meet the woman who convinced Idris to slow down long enough to wear a ring, Montgomery said. Odette tilted her head. He didn't need much convincing, just someone who didn't care about his bank account. The wife let out a short laugh. Refreshing. Idris didn't say anything, but the line of his jaw eased. After pleasantries, they drifted into the crowd. As the night moved on, more people approached, and each time Odette answered questions with sharp wit and calm confidence. She didn't parrot lines. She spoke like someone who knew Idris beyond the surface, because she did now. And it showed when the orchestra paused for speeches. Idris was summoned to the stage. Odette remained near the back, sipping a flute of something she couldn't pronounce. Montgomery joined her, his expression unreadable. "You've been with him, what, 2 months?" he asked. "Almost 3. And you think he's ready for what comes next?" Odette turned to face him fully. "I think he's been ready for a long time. He just didn't believe he deserved it." Montgomery studied her, then nodded once before slipping back into the crowd. Idris's speech was short, polished, and precise until the end. "I was taught to believe that success meant never slowing down, never trusting anyone. Never needing anyone," he said, his voice steady but different. "But then I met someone who reminded me that wealth without connection is just a gilded cage." Odette's throat tightened. "I built this company alone, but I don't want to continue alone." "Not anymore." He stepped down to applause, but his eyes were on her as he crossed the room. With each step, the crowd quieted. Odette felt it before she saw it, something about to shift. He stopped in front of her. "I told myself this was a performance," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "But there hasn't been a single moment with you that felt fake." The room fell still. People turned, waiters paused mid-step, the silence was expectant. Idris reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a different ring, smaller than the first, but no less beautiful. The stone was set in a delicate halo, the band a twist of white gold. This time, no contracts, no agendas. Just a man who fell in love with the only woman who ever saw him without armor. Odette's breath caught. He bent to one knee. Someone gasped. A flash went off behind them, but all she saw was him. "Marry me, for real?" She didn't speak. She didn't have to. She stepped forward, tears clouding her eyes, and nodded. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, the room erupted. People clapped, cheered, some even whistled, but Idris didn't look away from her. Later, in the car, her hand rested in his. No tension now, just quiet wonder. "I thought you hated dramatic scenes," she said softly. "I hate unfinished stories more," he said, "and I wasn't about to let ours end without a real beginning." They didn't go back to the penthouse that night. Instead, he took her to a private property outside the city, a place he'd bought but never furnished. The house was all glass and clean lines, perched on a hill that overlooked a wide lake. Fog curled over the water, and the stars blinked like secrets. "I was going to sell it," he said as they walked through the empty rooms. "Why didn't you?" He turned to her. "Because I kept imagining you here." She stopped in the center of what would be the living room. "Doing what?" "Sketching in the morning light, dancing barefoot, laughing," he said. "Existing in a place that wasn't built to impress anyone, just to hold something real." Odette walked to the window and looked out. "I never thought I'd be someone who lived in a house like this," she said. "You still aren't," he replied. "You're someone who makes a house like this feel like home." She turned, and he was already walking toward her. It wasn't a kiss for the cameras. It didn't need to convince anyone. It was slow, reverent, and grounded entirely in truth. In the weeks that followed, the story of their engagement exploded, part fairy tale, part business saga, part redemption arc. But the headlines didn't matter. The board approved the acquisition. The paperwork finalized. The penthouse was still theirs, but they spent more time at the lake house together. And when she eventually opened her own art studio in the city, funded quietly, but entirely by her own name, he was there at every opening night, watching her the same way he did that first evening at the gala, not with calculation, but with awe. They never announced a wedding date to the press. But one morning, beneath the pale blue light of early spring, Odette stood barefoot on the porch of the lake house, sketchbook in hand, and called over her shoulder, "Do we really need a big ceremony?" Idris appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We don't need anything," he murmured into her neck, "except each other." And this time there were no contracts, no expectations, just two people who'd stopped pretending and found something real in the process. The wedding wasn't publicized. There were no camera crews, no glossy magazine spreads, no invasive headlines. Just a soft breeze rolling off the lake, a string quartet playing under a canopy of willow trees, and the quiet rustle of silk as Odette stepped barefoot across the grass. Only 30 guests were invited. Friends who mattered, people who'd earned their place in their lives, no business partners, no clients, no press. Idris stood beneath an arch of wildflowers, his expression still and composed until she reached him. Then whatever armor he had left fell away. "I didn't think I could love you more than I already did," he whispered as he took her hand, "but you prove me wrong every day." She glanced down at their joined fingers, the sun catching on both rings. "You know we could have just eloped. I would have followed you to the courthouse in my socks if you'd asked," he said. "But this is for you." They exchanged vows written in private, words so personal neither of them cared who heard them. There were no dramatic pauses or choreographed moments. Just laughter when Odette forgot her place, a quiet tear when Idris said her name like it was something sacred, and the kind of kiss that didn't need approval to feel like forever. Afterward, the reception took place by the water, long tables dressed in candles and wildflowers. There was no seating chart, no speeches. Just music, dancing, and an endless stretch of stars overhead. Odette laughed as Idris spun her across the dock, the hem of her dress trailing behind her like smoke. "You really can dance." "I had to learn," he said. "You're not the kind of woman a man can stand beside without learning how to keep up." She ran her fingers through his hair, now slightly tousled from the evening breeze. "You didn't just keep up, you met me step for step." They didn't leave for a honeymoon. The lake house was enough. For the first time in both their lives, they didn't need to run toward anything. They could just exist. One morning, Odette sat cross-legged on the porch, sketching the sky as it shifted from pale lavender to soft gold. Idris appeared behind her, holding 2 mugs of coffee, one clearly for her, the other untouched. "You've been up since sunrise," he noted. "I had a dream I didn't want to lose," she replied, accepting the cup. He leaned against the railing. "What was it?" She hesitated, then looked up at him. "We were older, still here, still like this. I was drawing you from memory, but I couldn't get your eyes right." He crouched beside her and brushed a thumb over her cheek. "You've already seen all there is in me. The rest is just light and shadow." She set the sketchbook aside and kissed him, slow and certain. "You're not a mystery anymore." "Good," he murmured. "Because I want to spend the rest of my life being known by you." Weeks passed, then months. The city called occasionally, but neither of them answered unless they wanted to. The company ran smoothly without Idris needing to be in every room. He let go of control the way a man does when he finally trusts something more than his own ambition. Odette's art studio in the city flourished. Not because of press or scandal, but because her work made people feel. She created with freedom now, no longer sketching to escape but to remember. Each piece held fragments of their story, the curve of a jawline, the flicker of light across a lake, the hush of a moment suspended in time. One afternoon, as she prepared for her second gallery opening, Idris appeared with a box in hand. "You're not allowed to bring me gifts on a day that's about my work," she said, eyeing it. "This isn't a gift," he said. "It's a distraction." She arched a brow. "From what?" He opened the box. Inside was a small bronze key. "For the studio downstairs," he said. "I bought the unit below yours." Her eyes widened. "Why?" "So when you finish your shows, you can come home without ever leaving the building." She stared at him, touched beyond words. And also, he added, because I'd like to start something of my own, a foundation. For kids like I was smart, ambitious, but overlooked. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. I'd like to help. He kissed her temple. I was hoping you'd say that. The foundation launched quietly, but within a year it had funded over a dozen scholarships. It wasn't charity, it was legacy. And it was theirs. They stayed close to the lake house, but kept a small apartment in the city above the studio. It was just enough space for two people who no longer needed to prove anything. The penthouse remained furnished but untouched, a monument to who they used to be, not who they were now. Every anniversary, they returned to the spot beneath the willows where they'd exchanged vows. They never invited anyone else, just a bottle of wine, a blanket, and a sketchbook. Some years they talked, some years they didn't. But always they stayed until the stars came out. One evening, as they sat watching the moon rise over the lake, Idris laced his fingers through hers. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you said no? No, she said. Because I didn't, he turned to her. You changed everything. You let me, he kissed her, slow and certain. I still do. And as the wind moved through the trees and the water lapped gently against the shore, neither of them spoke again. There was nothing left to say. They had already lived their grandest chapter. And now they were writing the quiet kind, the one most people spend a lifetime chasing.